My son's ex made him do 1,000 burpees for eating birthday cake, then laughed when he collapsed. When I played the recording of her saying I loved breaking him, she shrugged and said, "At least I upgraded." I walked away. That was 4 months ago. This morning, she had 47 missed calls from her therapist. When my son Jake came home and threw his basketball off the balcony, I knew something was up. But I also knew that if I walked into his room and asked what was wrong, he would do that teenage boy thing where they tell you to F off. So instead, I waited until the next morning to wake him up with a fresh omelet. Except he wasn't there. That's when I heard a grunting sound coming from the back garden. When I walked out to the shed there, he was on the ground, doing push-ups with sweat dripping down his face. He had just counted number 65 when he finally noticed me standing there. "Dad, I need to talk to you about something," he said. He told me what happened at practice. His lousy hoe ex-girlfriend had given his favorite hoodie to her new boyfriend Trevor, the captain of the basketball team. When Jake asked for it back after practice, she looked him up and down and said, "It actually fits someone with muscles now." Trevor flexed while wearing it, and the whole team laughed. I stared into my son's eyes, expecting to see some sort of sadness or heartbreak. But instead, I was met with a look of insanity. I'm done being the pathetic fat kid everyone laughs at. I'm going to change everything about myself. At first, I thought, okay, this might be good for him. Exercise helps process emotions, and maybe he needed this push. But within 2 weeks, he'd lost 20 pounds. His teacher, Ms. Thompson, called saying he was sleeping through the first period. When I asked him about it, he showed me his alarm history. He was getting up at 4 a.m. to run before his 5 a.m. gym session. Successful people sacrifice, he'd say with a straight face. The changes came fast after that. I caught him doing 1,000 burpees at midnight because he accidentally ate a piece of birthday cake at school. When his grandmother visited and made her famous lasagna, he sat at the table clutching his Tupperware while she silently wiped away tears. "I can't afford cheat meals," he'd say while shoveling dry chicken down his throat. "Did you know she used to make me walk behind her at school so people wouldn't know we were together?" His voice cracked. "I'm going to become someone she regrets losing." Within 2 weeks, he'd lost 20 pounds. And one afternoon, I did something I'd sworn I'd never do. I went through his journal. The second page made my stomach drop. Right there were the words, "My mom knew I was fat and never told me the truth." You see, his mom died when Jake was 11 from an eating disorder. She'd make him huge meals while secretly starving yourself. Jake found her collapsed in our kitchen. Her last words to him were, "You're perfect just the way you are, baby." Now my son was culling himself in the same way, convinced those words were just another lie. That evening I told him about a therapist that a family friend had recommended. "No, Dad, I hate you," I expected him to yell. But instead, he just silently nodded like he knew it was coming. And for weeks, Jake went without complaint. Dr. Liam said he was making excellent progress. Jake even started eating breakfast with me sometimes. I thought we'd struck this thing, until 6 months later, when the police called. They told me my son was trying to drown himself in Miller Lake at 5 a.m., but Jake wasn't trying to die. He was doing Navy SEAL training in 40-degree water, lips blue and hypothermic, still doing laps. When they pulled him out, he kept saying, "I'm not weak anymore. Tell Sarah I'm not weak." The paramedics said he asked them to check his body fat percentage in the ambulance. He was 119 pounds and 5'8". He was asleep at the hospital when Sarah showed up wearing his hoodie. She brought Trevor, who stood there smirking. "I didn't mean for this to happen," she said, but then added, "I was just being honest about the hoodie." Jake woke up while she was talking. He saw the hoodie and started laughing. Not normal laughing, the disturbing kind. "Of course you're wearing it," he said. "Of course you are." He wouldn't stop laughing. The nurse called for a sedative while Sarah backed out of the room. But even after they left, Jake's heart rate wouldn't stabilize. The doctor pulled me aside and explained that his body was shutting down. They started fourth nutrition, but Jake kept pulling at the tubes. "It's making me fat," he whispered. That night his heart stopped twice. They brought him back both times, but the doctor said the damage was extensive. He woke up once more. "Dad, am I skinny enough now?" he asked. I told him he was perfect, that he'd always been perfect. He smiled and said, "Don't lie to me like Mom did." Jake died at 3:30 a.m. The official cause was cardiac arrest due to severe malnutrition and hypothermia. I didn't say a word, not because I wasn't extremely heartbroken, but because I knew I had to make Sarah pay. I sat in my car outside the funeral home for 20 minutes, watching Sarah's Instagram story through blurred vision. There she was, Jake's hoodie draped over her shoulders, mascara strategically smudged as she posed for another selfie. The caption read, "R.I.P. Jake, you were loved," with 3 broken heart emojis. My hands trembled against the steering wheel as I watched her swipe through filters to find the most flattering one for her grief performance. The parking lot was nearly empty now. Most people had left after the service, but Sarah lingered with her friends, all of them taking turns hugging her while she clutched that hoodie like a prize. I noticed the dried ketchup stain on the left sleeve from Jake's last meal at home, when he'd finally agreed to eat a burger with me. That was 3 days before the lake. I stepped out of my car and walked toward them. Sarah saw me coming and pulled the hoodie tighter around herself, whispering something to her friends. They formed a protective semicircle around her. My voice came out steadier than I felt. I asked for the hoodie back. Just that, nothing else. Sarah's eyes welled up with fresh tears as she pressed the fabric to her face. She said it was all she had left of him, that she needed something to remember him by. Her friends nodded sympathetically, shooting me me looks like I was some kind of monster. Trevor appeared from nowhere, stepping between us. Jake's former teammate, now Sarah's defender. He told me to get over it, that I needed to let people grieve in their own way. Behind his shoulder, I caught Sarah's expression shift for just a moment. The tears stopped. A small smirk played at the corner of her mouth. Then she leaned forward and whispered something I'll never forget. She said Jake had always wanted to look like Trevor anyway. The words hit me like ice water. I turned and walked back to my car without another word, but not before I saw her bury her face in Trevor's chest, the performance resuming for her audience. Jake's basketball coach intercepted me before I could leave. Coach Miller pulled me aside near the entrance, his face heavy with something that looked like guilt. He started talking about the hoodie incident at practice, how he should have stepped in when it happened. Then he mentioned something that made my blood run cold. This wasn't the first time he'd seen Sarah do this. She had a pattern, he said, a pattern of collecting trophies. I drove home in a daze, but by the next morning, the daze had crystallized into something sharper. I couldn't let this go, not when Jake's death was already becoming her story to tell. The first time I saw her selling memorial bracelets was outside the school. She'd set up a little table with Jake's senior photo, the one where he was still healthy, still smiling. In memory of Jake, the bracelets read, $15 each. She was keeping the money. I watched from across the street as students lined up, eager to show their support. She'd even used his last Instagram photo without asking, the one I'd taken of him shooting hoops in our driveway just 2 months ago. My sister called that evening. She said people were worried about me, that I'd been acting strange since the funeral. Had I considered grief counseling? Maybe a support group? I realized then that Sarah had already started spinning her narrative, the grieving girlfriend and the unhinged father. I could see how this would play out. That night, I went through Jake's room more carefully. Behind his desk, wedged between old textbooks, I found a notebook I'd never seen before. My hands shook as I opened it. Page after page of dated entries. Not quite a diary, but something more methodical. He'd documented everything. Every cruel comment. Every public humiliation. Every time she'd made him feel worthless. The entries went back 8 months, starting just 2 weeks into their relationship. November 3rd, she said my laugh was embarrassing in front of her friends. December 18th, made me wait in the car during Emma's party because she didn't want people to see us arrive together. January 22nd, called me her practice boyfriend when she thought I couldn't hear. The next morning, Sarah's mother called. Mrs. Thompson's voice was carefully modulated, sympathetic but firm. She understood I was grieving, but Sarah was just a teenage girl who'd made some mistakes. We all say things we don't mean, and with college applications coming up, all this stress wasn't good for anyone. The threat was subtle, but clear. I created the anonymous social media account that afternoon. Nothing dramatic, just a place to document the truth. I started screenshotting Sarah's posts about Jake, comparing them to the cruel messages I'd found in his phone. The contrast was stark, her public grief versus her private cruelty. 2 days later, Trevor's parents invited me for coffee. The Millers were good people, and they looked uncomfortable as they sat across from me at their kitchen table. They were concerned about Sarah's influence on their son. Mrs. Miller had noticed changes in Trevor since he'd started spending time with her. Nothing they could put their finger on exactly, but something felt wrong. I kept digging. In Jake's backpack, I found more than just his calculator and study notes. Sarah had kept other things too. His team photo where she'd drawn hearts around Trevor's face, his AP physics notes that she was now using for her own class. She'd been posting these items on her Instagram stories as precious memories, but I noticed the price tags on some memorial items she was selling. She was profiting from my son's death in every way possible. Then Sarah's best friend Alexandra messaged me privately. She said she was scared of Sarah but couldn't prove anything specific. She'd watched Sarah destroy people before, but everyone always blamed the victim afterward. Alexandra deleted the message within minutes, but I'd already screenshotted it. My brother visited the following week. He sat in Jake's room with me, looking at the evidence I'd gathered. He suggested I needed to move on, that this obsession wasn't healthy. He mentioned that Sarah's family was considering a restraining order after the parking lot confrontation. The walls were closing in, but I couldn't stop, not when I kept finding more. In Jake's phone, buried in archived messages, I found texts between him and Sarah from when they were still together. She'd called him her practice boyfriend, directly to him, not just behind his back. The messages were dated during what should have been the honeymoon phase of their relationship. She'd been cruel from the very beginning. I started noticing Sarah with someone new at school events, another overweight boy from Jake's grade, David Chen. She posted photos of them at the gym together, captioned with motivational quotes about helping him transform his life. The pattern was repeating itself right in front of everyone. Work became impossible. During a presentation about brand transformation, I found myself staring at the slide, thinking about Jake's transformation. My boss suggested I take some time off. I agreed, but didn't tell him I was spending that time documenting everything. The school counselor was my next stop. Ms. Price listened politely as I laid out my concerns, but her response was predictable. Sarah was grieving in her own way. Teenagers process loss differently. Had I considered that I might be projecting my own guilt? I left her office when I realized her daughter Emma was one of Sarah's closest friends. I followed Sarah to the mall one Saturday. I'm not proud of it, but I needed to see. She tried on designer clothes for 2 hours, Jake's hoodie tied around her waist the entire time. She She laughed with her friends, took selfies, acted like any other teenage girl on a shopping trip, except she was wearing my dead son's hoodie like an accessory. The breaking point came when Jake's best friend Liam finally cracked. He'd been carrying guilt since Jake's death, and it all came pouring out over coffee. He forwarded me screenshots from a group chat called Drama King, where Sarah had shared Jake's most vulnerable texts. The messages were dated the night before Jake went to the lake. She'd been mocking his breakdown to their entire friend group while he was at his lowest point. Jake's grandmother noticed my obsession during Sunday dinner, but instead of discouraging me, she leaned in close and whispered that she'd seen Sarah laughing at the funeral. Not crying laughing, but actual laughter when she thought no one was looking. "That girl has empty eyes," she said, gripping my hand. The pattern became clearer the more I investigated. Sarah dated insecure boys, built them up just enough to gain their trust, then systematically destroyed them while keeping trophies of her conquests. It was sport to her. Then Nicholas reached out. Sarah's ex-boyfriend from freshman year had seen my memorial post for Jake. He warned me that Sarah destroys people for fun and that Jake wasn't her first victim. He'd spent years in therapy after their relationship. He'd been too scared to warn others, but Jake's death had shaken something loose in him. I screenshotted everything. Every post where Sarah profited from Jake's death, the GoFundMe that raised $8,000, the memorial merchandise she sold through her Etsy shop, the sponsored posts from fitness brands capitalizing on her tragic story. She was making more money from his death than Jake had ever made at his part-time job. Sarah's mother called again, this time with explicit threats about harassment charges. But that same night, Trevor's mother texted me secretly. "Keep digging," was all she said. The final revelation of this phase came from Liam again. He admitted that Sarah had made him deliver cruel messages to Jake, things she wanted to say but needed plausible deniability for. He thought it was just relationship stuff, normal teenage drama. He hadn't realized he was being used as a weapon against his best friend until it was too late. Sarah started a grief support group at school the following Monday. I watched from my car as she stood at the entrance, wearing Jake's hoodie like armor, greeting students with practiced tears. She positioned herself as the victim of toxic masculinity, explaining how Jake's obsession with appearance had destroyed them both. The other students nodded sympathetically, unaware they were being recruited into her narrative. I recognized her tactics immediately from Jake's journal. First came the isolation. She'd separate her target from friends who might intervene. Then the gaslighting would begin, making them question their own perceptions. Finally, she'd keep a trophy from each conquest, a physical reminder of her victory. Jake had documented it all with the precision of someone trying to prove he wasn't going crazy. The school janitor found me sitting on the bleachers after everyone had left. Mr. Rodriguez had worked there for 20 years and seen everything. He sat down beside me and mentioned he'd witnessed something the day before the hoodie incident. Sarah and Trevor had been in the empty gym, planning the whole thing. They'd been laughing about how they would break Jake in front of everyone. Mr. Rodriguez hadn't thought much of it at the time, just kids being kids. Now he couldn't stop thinking about it. I tried warning David Chen's parents the next afternoon. They thanked me politely, but explained their son needed the confidence boost a pretty girlfriend provided. David had already lost 30 pounds in just 3 weeks. They saw it as positive motivation. I left their house knowing I'd failed to protect another boy from Sarah's games. My documentation grew more detailed. I created timelines showing how Sarah exploited Jake's death for her college applications. She'd written essays about losing her first love to toxic diet culture, positioning herself as an advocate for body positivity. The irony made me physically sick. She posted excerpts on social media, fishing for sympathy and scholarship opportunities. A girl named Melissa contacted me through the anonymous account. She'd gone to middle school with Sarah and remembered a similar incident. A boy named Kevin had attempted sewer slide after Sarah's systematic destruction of his self-esteem. Sarah had called it being honest about his appearance. The school had hushed it up, and Kevin's family moved away. Sarah kept his Letterman jacket as a trophy. I maintained my composure at school events, documenting Sarah's behavior while appearing to have moved on. Other parents began noticing patterns once I subtly pointed them out. The way Sarah would loudly comfort David Chen about his weight in public, while her friends snickered behind their hands. How she'd post unflattering photos of him with captions about loving him despite his flaws. Sarah announced a memorial fundraiser for what would have been Jake's birthday. She planned to donate the proceeds to an eating disorder foundation, she claimed. I knew the truth. She needed money for her spring break trip. The fundraiser would legitimize her victim status while funding her vacation. I had to act before she profited further from my son's death. David Chen's sister reached out to me in desperation. She'd found her brother doing midnight runs in their neighborhood, pushing himself despite chest pains. He'd started weighing himself multiple times per day and hiding food in his room only to throw it away later. The same pattern Jake had followed. She begged me to help before it was too late. Sarah's mask slipped during an incident at a local restaurant. A server mentioned Jake while taking their order, and Sarah snapped. She complained loudly about people not letting her move on, causing a scene that made Trevor visibly uncomfortable. For just a moment, other diners saw the real Sarah, not the grieving girlfriend, but an irritated teenager angry that her meal had been interrupted by an inconvenient memory. She approached me the following week with an offer to co-host the memorial fundraiser. She thought it would show the community we'd healed and moved forward together. When I declined, her expression hardened. She warned that she'd make the event about toxic parenting if I didn't cooperate. The threat was clear: play along or be painted as the villain in her story. Her inner circle began fracturing when Alexandra caught Sarah practicing grief faces in the bathroom mirror. Sarah had been rehearsing different expressions of sorrow, testing which looked most convincing. Alexandra took a video before Sarah noticed her. The betrayal in Alexandra's eyes was evident as she realized her best friend's grief was just another performance. I discovered more lies when Trevor's friend Tyler shared old text messages. Sarah had been planning to take Jake's hoodie weeks before their breakup. She'd told Trevor it would be hilarious to see Jake beg for it back. The humiliation had been premeditated, orchestrated for maximum damage. Tyler felt guilty for not speaking up sooner, but had been afraid of becoming Sarah's next target. Sarah's control was limited to the school's social hierarchy and parents who enabled her behavior. She couldn't manipulate evidence or silence everyone who'd witnessed her cruelty. Her power came from people's reluctance to challenge a grieving teenager, but that protection was wearing thin as more victims emerged. Coach Miller had kept old security footage from the gym that he'd forgotten existed. When I convinced him to review it, we found clear video of Sarah directing Trevor on how to humiliate Jake. She'd choreographed the entire scene, down to having other teammates positioned to block any escape routes. The coach's hands shook as he watched, realizing he could have prevented everything if he'd just been paying attention. Jake's grandmother offered her entire life savings to expose Sarah's cruelty. Despite family pressure to let it go, she couldn't bear the thought of other grandchildren suffering the same fate. She'd lost 2 grandchildren, she said, Jake to Sarah's cruelty and Jake's mother to the same perfectionist demons. She wouldn't let Sarah create more victims. I began connecting with other families who'd experienced Sarah's manipulations. We formed an informal support network, sharing information and watching for new victims. Sarah couldn't infiltrate our group because we'd all seen through her act. We focused on documentation and protection, not revenge or threats. My approach remained methodical and legal. I refused to stalk or threaten, instead focusing on gathering evidence and protecting potential victims. Every interaction was recorded legally, every social media post screenshotted, every witness statement documented. I would expose Sarah through truth, not intimidation. The grocery store confrontation happened by chance. Sarah was shopping with her mother when we ended up in the same aisle. When I politely moved past them, Sarah made a comment about needing Jake gone to be with Trevor. Her mother gasped, and Sarah quickly tried to backtrack, but I'd already started recording on my phone. The admission was captured clearly. Multiple witnesses began corroborating Sarah's pattern of targeting insecure boys. Teachers recalled incidents they'd dismissed as teenage drama. Parents remembered odd comments their sons had made about Sarah. The pattern emerged clearly. She selected vulnerable targets, gained their trust, then systematically destroyed their self-worth while collecting trophies. Sarah's parents started distancing themselves as neighbors shared concerns. Mrs. Thompson stopped defending her daughter publicly after several families approached her with evidence. Mr. Thompson was seen arguing with Sarah in their driveway after David Chen's parents finally confronted them about her behavior. Community members connected dots about Sarah's manipulations across multiple activities. She'd left a trail of damaged boys through the yearbook committee, drama club, and student council. Each activity provided new hunting grounds for her twisted games. The pattern was consistent and undeniable once people started comparing notes. A parent network mobilized to monitor Sarah's influence on vulnerable students. We created a discreet warning system, alerting each other when Sarah showed interest in someone new. It wasn't about punishing her. It was about protecting potential victims from her psychological warfare. Trevor grew increasingly disturbed by Sarah's callousness. He'd started dating her for the social status, but hadn't anticipated the depth of her cruelty. When he overheard her joking about keeping Jake's hoodie as a victory trophy, something shifted. He secretly recorded her admission, wrestling with his conscience about what to do with the evidence. School parents who'd initially sided with Sarah began apologizing to me. They'd believed her victim narrative but started seeing the truth in small details. The way she'd smile when mentioning Jake's death, how she'd steer conversations to maximize sympathy. The calculated nature of her grief performance became obvious once they knew what to look for. Sarah's options narrowed as news of the Memorial Fund controversy spread. College admissions officers started asking questions about the fundraiser's legitimacy. Her carefully crafted victim narrative was unraveling as more people examined the timeline of events. The scholarship opportunities she'd counted on began disappearing. Then came the revelation about Sarah's freshman year victim. The family had stayed silent out of shame, but Jake's death gave them courage to speak. Their son had attempted sewer slide after months of Sarah's psychological torture. She'd kept his shoes as a trophy, displaying them in her room as vintage decor. The parents had photos of her wearing them in social media posts, smiling as if they were just another fashion statement. I worked to ensure David Chen got support without public humiliation. His parents finally intervened after his sister showed them the evidence I'd gathered. They pulled him from school for a few days and got him into counseling. counseling. David later told me Sarah had been texting him constantly, alternating between love bombing and cruel observations about his body. Jake's teachers and coaches united to share their regrets and observations. They created a presentation for the school board about recognizing signs of psychological abuse among students. Mrs. Thompson from English class admitted she'd noticed Jake's essays growing darker, but hadn't connected it to Sarah's influence. Coach Miller vowed to pay closer attention to team dynamics. Sarah's attempts to craft a new narrative failed as too many people compared notes. She tried claiming she was being bullied for grieving differently, but the evidence was overwhelming. Her social media posts contradicted her public statements. The timeline of her relationship with Trevor proved she'd been planning Jake's humiliation for weeks. Mrs. Miller witnessed Sarah mocking Jake's death during a sleepover at her house. She'd been bringing snacks to the girls when she overheard Sarah laughing about upgrading from Jake to Trevor. The other girls looked uncomfortable but laughed along, afraid of becoming targets themselves. Mrs. Miller stood frozen in the hallway, realizing the depth of Sarah's sociopathy. My reputation in the community slowly rebuilt as people recognized my restraint and focus on protection rather than revenge. I attended school board meetings, shared documentation with administrators, and worked within the system to create awareness. The angry, unhinged father narrative Sarah had tried to create didn't match the methodical advocate people saw. Alexandra finally found the courage to share more evidence. She provided screenshots of Sarah's college essay drafts dated 2 weeks before Jake's death. Sarah had been writing about losing someone to an eating disorder before Jake even went to the lake. The premeditation was chilling. She'd been crafting her victim story while actively driving Jake toward destruction. Jake's birthday approached, and I knew I had to act before Sarah's theatrical memorial performance. She'd planned a candlelight vigil with speeches about body positivity and toxic masculinity. The hypocrisy was unbearable. She intended to profit from the very insecurities she'd weaponized against Jake. The community began recognizing Sarah's pattern of targeting vulnerable boys for narcissistic supply. She fed off their destruction, collecting trophies and stories she could later use for sympathy and attention. Parents started discussing how to protect their children from predators who operated through emotional manipulation rather than physical abuse. I realized victory wouldn't come from destroying Sarah, but from preventing her from creating more victims. The goal shifted from revenge to protection. Every family warned, every potential victim saved. That would be Jake's true legacy. Sarah might never face legal consequences, but she could be exposed and isolated from vulnerable targets. When Sarah tried to provoke me at a school event, I responded with calm grace. She made cutting remarks about Jake's weakness, trying to elicit an angry response that would support her narrative. Instead, I simply documented her words while maintaining composure. The crowd saw through her act, recognizing the cruelty beneath her performance. The school board privately acknowledged concerns about Sarah's influence on vulnerable students. While they couldn't take official action without clear policy violations, they began discussing ways to address psychological bullying. Administrators started training teachers to recognize predatory behavior patterns among students. Truth prevailed as multiple families shared similar experiences. The stories were heartbreakingly consistent. Vulnerable boys targeted, systematically broken down, and discarded once Sarah had extracted maximum entertainment from their suffering. Parents who'd been too ashamed to speak up found strength in numbers. Sarah's memorial fundraiser faced cancellation after organizers learned about her trophy collecting. Someone leaked a photo of her posing with Jake's hoodie and other items taken from victims. The image spread through social media, showing Sarah surrounded by her conquest's belongings like a hunter displaying pelts. The fundraiser venue withdrew their support. In desperation, Sarah approached me with an offer. She would return Jake's hoodie if I stopped exposing her behavior. She tried to appear remorseful, but her eyes remained cold and calculating. I recorded the entire conversation, capturing her admission that she'd never felt bad about Jake's death, only annoyed by the inconvenience of maintaining her grief act. The evidence against Sarah mounted daily. Former victims found courage to speak up. Parents shared stories they'd kept hidden out of shame. Teachers connected incidents they'd dismissed as isolated events. The full scope of Sarah's predatory behavior emerged. Years of targeting vulnerable boys, extracting their trust, then psychologically destroying them for entertainment. Each revelation strengthened the community's resolve to protect future victims. Sarah's power had always come from operating in shadows, from people's reluctance to believe a teenage girl could be so calculatingly cruel. Once exposed to light, her influence withered. She could no longer hunt freely in a community that knew her true nature. The evidence compilation took on new urgency when Sarah's college scholarship deadline approached. She'd positioned herself perfectly, the grieving girlfriend who'd lost her first love to toxic masculinity and diet culture. Her essay about Jake's death had already won regional competitions. I knew the memorial event would be her final performance piece, cementing her victim narrative for admissions committees. That Thursday morning, I received an unexpected call from the school administration. They wanted to meet about the memorial fundraiser. In the conference room sat Principal Henderson, 2 school board members, and the district's legal counsel. They'd received received multiple complaints about Sarah's fundraising activities. Parents had questioned where the money was going. The administration couldn't cancel the event without evidence of wrongdoing, but they were watching closely. Sarah's preparations for Jake's birthday memorial intensified. She recruited the drama club to help with staging, convinced the choir to perform, and even arranged for local news coverage. Her social media posts ramped up, each one carefully crafted to maximize sympathy. She posted old photos of her and Jake, conveniently cropping out the moments where her body language showed obvious disgust. David Chen's condition deteriorated rapidly. His sister sent me photos of him at 3 a.m., running stairs at the school stadium. He'd lost 45 pounds in 6 weeks. When his parents finally confronted Sarah, she played the supportive girlfriend perfectly, expressing concern while subtly suggesting David just needed more willpower. I watched from my car as she hugged David's mother, then immediately texted David about his lack of commitment. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Trevor's younger brother had been recording basketball practices for highlight reels. While reviewing old footage, he found something he'd missed: clear audio of Sarah instructing Trevor on exactly how to humiliate Jake. She'd scripted specific phrases, planned the timing, even suggested having someone record it for social media. The boy brought the footage to his parents, terrified of what his brother had become. Mrs. Miller called me immediately. She'd confronted Trevor about the recording, and he'd broken down completely. He admitted Sarah had been threatening to destroy his reputation if he didn't comply. She had screenshots of messages where he'd admitted to cheating on tests, photos from parties where he'd been drinking. The same pattern: gain trust, gather ammunition, deploy when useful. I met with the other families in our informal network. We had testimonies from 7 different boys Sarah had targeted over 3 years. Each story followed the same progression. She'd identify insecure boys, usually overweight or socially awkward. She'd build them up initially, making them feel special. Then came the systematic destruction, always culminating in a public humiliation and a kept trophy. The memorial event was 2 days away when Alexandra made her decision. She couldn't stand watching Sarah prepare another performance. She forwarded me everything: years of messages where Sarah had bragged about her conquests, detailed plans for psychological manipulation, even a ranking system for her victims. Jake had been her masterpiece, she'd written, the one she'd broken most completely. Sarah must have sensed the walls closing in. She showed up at my house unannounced, David Chen waiting in her car. She wanted to make a deal. She'd return Jake's hoodie and cancel the memorial if I stopped spreading lies about her. When I refused, her mask finally dropped completely. She laughed about how easy Jake had been to break, how pathetic he'd looked begging for validation. I recorded every word. The next morning, David Chen collapsed during his pre-dawn run. His heart rate wouldn't stabilize, and doctors found he'd been taking dangerous combinations of diet pills and pre-workout supplements. From his hospital bed, he finally told his parents everything. Sarah had been texting him constantly, sending photos of male fitness models, asking why he couldn't look like that yet. The messages were relentless, calculated to destroy any progress he felt he'd made. Trevor couldn't take the guilt anymore. He went to his parents with everything: Sarah's threats, her manipulation tactics, the other boys she'd targeted. He played them recordings he'd secretly made of Sarah describing her collection of trophies from each victim. She kept them in a storage box under her bed, she'd said, labeled with dates and names like a serial killer's souvenirs. The Millers and I decided to approach the school administration together. We presented our evidence methodically: recordings, screenshots, witness testimonies. The principal's face grew paler with each revelation. The pattern was undeniable, the premeditation clear. They couldn't ignore this anymore, not with David Chen in the hospital and Jake in the ground. Sarah's parents arrived at school within an hour of being called. I watched through the office window as they reviewed the evidence. Mrs. Thompson's composed facade crumbled as she read Sarah's messages about Jake. Mr. Thompson had to leave the room when they played the recording of Sarah laughing about Jake's death. They'd enabled a monster without realizing it. The memorial fundraiser was canceled that afternoon. The school cited logistical concerns, but word spread quickly through the parent network. Sarah tried to salvage her narrative on social media, claiming she was being persecuted for grieving differently. But Alexandra had already started sharing screenshots. Other victims came forward. The truth spread faster than Sarah could spin it. Sarah made one last desperate play. She posted a video claiming she was being bullied to the point of considering self-harm, but she'd miscalculated. The community had seen too much. Parents who'd lost sons to her cruelty weren't swayed by manipulation tactics. Mental health professionals were alerted to ensure Sarah got help, but her victim card had finally expired. The school board called an emergency meeting. They implemented new policies about psychological bullying, mandatory reporting for teachers who witnessed emotional abuse, and support systems for vulnerable students. It wasn't called Jake's Law, but everyone knew why these changes were happening. Real change, not the performative advocacy Sarah had planned. College admissions season arrived, and Sarah's carefully crafted applications fell apart. Schools that had been interested started asking questions about the memorial fund, the canceled fundraiser, the inconsistencies in her story. Her scholarship opportunities evaporated. The future she'd built on Jake's destruction crumbled. Trevor testified to the school board about Sarah's methods. He detailed how she'd identified vulnerable targets, isolated them from support systems, and systematically destroyed their self-worth. He admitted his own complicity, but also revealed the threats she'd used to control him. His testimony helped other victims understand they weren't alone, weren't crazy, weren't weak. Sarah's trophy collection was discovered when her parents searched her room. Dozens of items taken from boys she'd targeted: hoodies, watches, team jerseys, class rings, each one labeled with a date and a cruel nickname. Jake's hoodie was at the top, marked "Practice Boy, Best One Yet." Her parents turned everything over to the families, their shame evident in every interaction. The community response was measured but firm. Sarah found herself excluded from school events, social gatherings, and activities, not through any organized campaign, but through the natural consequence of people knowing who she really was. Her power had always come from operating in shadows. In the light, she was just a cruel teenager who'd run out of victims. David Chen slowly recovered. His parents got him proper therapy, not the performance art Sarah had been conducting. He testified at a school board meeting about the manipulation tactics, the constant messages, the way Sarah had made him feel like dying was better than disappointing her. His courage inspired other victims to speak up. I returned to work gradually, my focus shifting from revenge to prevention. The parent network we'd formed became a model for other schools. We created resources for identifying predatory behavior, supporting victims, and preventing future tragedies. It wasn't the legacy I'd wanted for Jake, but it was the one that might save other boys. Sarah's attempts to attend community college failed when her reputation preceded her. Word spread through social networks. Warning posts appeared on college forums. She couldn't escape what she'd done. Her parents eventually moved her to a residential therapy program in another state, finally acknowledging the depth of their daughter's issues. The hoodie came back to me through the Thompsons. They'd cleaned it, folded it carefully, and delivered it with a letter of apology. I held it for a long time, remembering Jake's smile when he'd first bought it, before Sarah had turned it into a symbol of his worthlessness. The ketchup stain was gone, but the memories remained. On what would have been Jake's 18th birthday, we held a different kind of memorial. Former victims of Sarah's cruelty gathered to share their stories and support each other. David Chen spoke about recovery. Trevor apologized for his role. Other boys found courage to name their experiences. It wasn't the theatrical performance Sarah had planned, but it was real. The scholarship fund I established in Jake's name focused on supporting students who'd experienced psychological bullying. The first recipient was a boy from a neighboring school who'd attempted sewer slide after similar torment. He'd survived, unlike Jake, but carried the same scars. The fund would help him get therapy, support, and a chance at healing. Sarah's final message to me came through her therapy program, a carefully worded apology, clearly coached by professionals. She claimed to understand the pain she'd caused, to feel remorse for her actions, but even in her apology, she couldn't resist mentioning how Jake's death had affected her college prospects. Some people never really change. The other families in our network continued meeting monthly. We monitored for new predators, supported struggling students, and shared resources. What started as my desperate search for justice became a community committed to protection. Jake's death had exposed a predator, but more importantly, it had created a shield for future victims. Standing at Jake's grave with his returned hoodie, I finally let myself grieve properly, not just for my son, but for all the boys Sarah had broken, for the innocence she'd stolen, for the trust she'd weaponized. The hoodie would be buried with Jake, not as a trophy of her cruelty, but as a symbol of his true worth, finally recognized and honored. The ripple effects continued for months. Teachers became more vigilant. Parents paid closer attention. Students learned to recognize manipulation tactics. The community had learned a terrible lesson through Jake's death, but they'd learned it well. No other child would suffer what Jake had suffered, not if we could prevent it. Sarah's institutionalization brought no satisfaction, only relief. She was getting help, whether she wanted it or not. Her collection of trophies had been returned to victims' families. Her carefully crafted image had shattered. She was no longer a threat to vulnerable boys seeking validation. That was all that mattered now. I kept Jake's journal and the evidence we'd gathered, not out of bitterness, but as a reminder. A reminder that predators don't always look like monsters. Sometimes they're pretty teenage girls who know exactly how to identify and exploit vulnerability. Sometimes the most dangerous bullies are the ones who convince everyone else they're the victim. The support group for Sarah's victims grew beyond our small community. Other schools reached out, sharing similar stories. We created online resources, warning signs to watch for, strategies for intervention. Jake's story became a cautionary tale, but also a catalyst for change. His death had meaning, even if the price was unbearable. 1 year later, David Chen ran a 5K to raise money for eating disorder awareness. He'd gained back healthy weight, found real confidence, and learned to value himself beyond anyone else's opinion. He wore a shirt with Jake's picture, honoring the boy who died before anyone understood the danger. Trevor ran beside him, seeking redemption through action rather than words. The changes in our community were subtle but significant. Parents talked more openly with their children about emotional manipulation. Teachers received training on recognizing psychological abuse. Students learned that cruelty disguised as honesty was still cruelty. The culture that had allowed Sarah to thrive slowly transformed into one that protected the vulnerable. I returned to Jake's room less frequently, but kept it exactly as he'd left it. A shrine not to his death, but to his life before Sarah's poison. His basketball still sat in the corner. His textbooks remained on his desk. Evidence of a boy who'd been happy before someone convinced him he wasn't enough. The final testimony came from Kevin, Sarah's first known victim from middle school. His family had moved away, but he'd heard about Jake through social media. He flew back to share his story, to add his voice to the chorus of survivors. He'd attempted sewer slide at 13 after months of Sarah's torture. He'd survived but carried the scars. His presence reminded everyone that Jake wasn't Sarah's first victim, just her most complete destruction. As I write this, Sarah remains in treatment. Her parents visit monthly, their own therapy ongoing. They've accepted responsibility for enabling her behavior, for dismissing warning signs, for prioritizing their daughter's success over others' safety. Their foundation now funds psychological abuse prevention programs in schools. The hoodie is with Jake now, buried beside him after a small ceremony with close family. It's no longer a symbol of Sarah's cruelty, but of Jake's truth, that he was perfect as he was, that he deserved love without transformation, that no one had the right to break him for sport. The stain is gone, but the love remains. Our community learned that monsters don't always announce themselves. Sometimes they smile sweetly, offer false support, and destroy lives while playing victim. But we also learned that truth, when finally spoken, has power, that communities can protect their vulnerable, that one father's refusal to let his son's death become a predator's profit can spark real change. Jake's legacy isn't the theatrical memorial Sarah had planned. It's in David Chen's healthy smile, in Trevor's determination to make amends, in the policies that protect vulnerable students, in the parents who now recognize warning signs, in the victims who found their voices. He died believing he wasn't enough, but his death proved he was everything. A catalyst, a warning, a shield for others. I still wake some mornings expecting to find Jake doing push-ups in the shed. The grief hasn't faded, just transformed. But knowing that Sarah can't hurt anyone else, that her future victims are safe, that Jake's death exposed a predator and protected the innocent, that brings a kind of peace. Not happiness, never that, but purpose. And for now, that's enough.
My grandmother used me and my cousins as family assets for decades, so I exposed her secret and destroyed her lives with a move she never saw coming. Growing up, my family only had one source of income, renting us out. My grandparents started the rental system in 1987. They noticed how sexually frustrated their male relatives were, how their marriages crumbled during dry spells. So they created what I now like to joke as being the modern solution. One child, specifically a daughter, would be loaned to relatives who needed therapeutic refreshers. The chosen child wore a GPS tracker bracelet that couldn't be removed. My mother was one of the first to volunteer. Her dad, my granddad, had preached to her since she was a newborn about the woman's purpose in the family, how it was up to us to put the men at ease by using what our mama gave us. She genuinely believed she was helping the family, preventing divorces, stopping relatives from turning violence on each other, all the traits of a real woman. It actually sounds crazy saying it out loud, but for so long, this is just the way things were. 3 generations of our family had grown up seeing this as normal. My aunts would bring their husbands to preview sessions, teaching them which acts were most accessible, and more importantly, most pleasurable for the male. By the time men married into our family, they had their own access schedules. The women weren't innocent bystanders either. My grandmother maintained the booking calendar. My mother coordinated transportation. My aunts prepared aftercare kits and taught younger girls that this was keeping the family strong. They believed it. Without the program, they'd say, imagine how many divorces we'd have. I was 6 when I first watched my cousin Priya get loaded into Uncle Devang's car. I watched his parents count the cash payment while explaining Priya's trigger points like they were handing over a manual. The rules were specific. Children served from age 4 until 18. Then the next youngest would be selected. No gaps in coverage allowed. My grandmother kept detailed spreadsheets. Which child served which family, satisfaction ratings, injury logs labeled as maintenance records. She showed me once, proud of the organization. Client testimonials praising how much their marriages had improved. Payment histories showing our family's financial stability. And since I grew up as the ugly duckling of the family, double chin, huge nose, small eyes, by the time I turned 10, I still hadn't been picked. But everything changed when I turned 13 and found my granny's old laptop. It was hidden beneath a stack of towels, so I knew there had to be something juicy she was hiding. The password was easy, my birthday, since I was her future breadwinner. I wasn't sure what I was looking for. I just knew I was bored. But after just 20 minutes, I found it. Dozens of videos of encrypted client videos, 20 years of footage. Every session was recorded for quality assurance. I even found black and white photos of my mother as a preteen when her eyes were still filled with childhood innocence. And the more I uncovered, the more I realized how effed up our family really was. Something about watching my uncles learning techniques on their cousins finally opened my eyes. Generations of systematic violence, all carefully archived. And if I was anywhere other than my hometown, I would have ran straight to the police. But in my small town, over 80% of the officers consisted of my family members, ones who featured in the videos I had found. And I knew turning the videos meant putting my life in danger. So for a while, I had no idea what to do. I was sort of hoping that the problem would just go away by itself. And one day, it did. I was sitting at the kitchen table when I saw my cousin Madhu putting on a sari that barely covered her body, the sign that she was chosen. I asked her if she wanted to exercise before leaving, and she nodded. No listening ears, no home prison, just us pouring our hearts out. It was the first time we were able to talk about what was going on. She was in tears. This is my third family. The other 2 rejected me for being too injured. She was hyperventilating, and that's when we heard it. Her dad shouting that it was time to go. I didn't get to save her, but that's how it started. Every weekend, while the men had fun with their assigned girls, me and the unchosen ones would gather together in the shed, all desperate to avoid our fate. I taught them how to recall detailed accounts of abuse, which might not sound like much, but for most most of us, it was everything. We had spent so long being struck into silence that it took us weeks of practice to speak about what was going on. But slowly, we found our voices. Everything crashed down at my cousin Sunita's 16th birthday. Grandmother stood with the GPS bracelet, announcing Sunita would go to the highest bidder. Suddenly, all the men broke out into applause for Mr. Sharma, who'd paid in advance. She was so young she hadn't even started puberty yet. Something in me snapped. As he started the final vow, I stood up and spoke. But this time, it wasn't in the shed. It was out loud. This isn't right. She deserves a childhood. People's jaws dropped. The men clenched their fists in anger. Through the window, I could see men in suits surrounding us. Someone had called them about a marriage in progress. The door burst open and 3 CPS workers rushed inside, their badges gleaming as they moved through the crowd. Behind them, 2 police officers scanned the room while grandmother's fingers flew across her phone screen, deleting messages with practiced speed. I grabbed Sunita's hand and pulled her toward the kitchen, gathering my younger cousins around me like a shield. The lead social worker, a woman with graying hair and tired eyes, stepped forward during what should have been the cake cutting. She looked directly at Sunita, then at Mr. Sharma, who was already backing toward the wall, his wedding ring catching the light as he raised his hands defensively. He stammered something about being just a family friend, just here for the party, nothing more. The words erupted from me before I could stop them. I pointed at grandmother, and the accusation tore through the celebration like lightning. She sells us. The room erupted in nervous laughter, relatives shaking their heads at my teenage dramatics, until the officer's voice cut through the noise. He announced they had Madhu's statement from the hospital. Grandmother's face went pale. She turned to Aunt Priya, speaking rapidly in Tamil, gesturing wildly. Priya stood frozen between them, her hand unconsciously touching the insulin pump at her waist, the one grandmother's money paid for. The social worker asked Priya to translate, and I watched my aunt's mouth open and close like a fish gasping for air. My mind raced. The laptop was still hidden in my room, filled with evidence that could destroy everything, but mentioning it now might give grandmother time to have someone destroy it. I noticed her hand shaking as she gripped her phone, her knuckles white with tension. Sunita started crying, her small body trembling against mine. I wrapped my arms around her, whispering reassurances, not noticing grandmother typing furiously until I caught a glimpse of her screen. Clean the house now. My stomach dropped as I realized what that meant. Everything exploded at once. The social worker explained that Madhu was at the hospital, that police needed statements from everyone, and just then my mother's sister burst through the door demanding to know where her cut was. She'd driven 3 hours after hearing about the party, expecting her usual payment. I held my 9-year-old cousin tighter as she sobbed into my shirt. Without thinking, I mentioned that there were other girls, that this wasn't just about Sunita. A family friend near the door immediately turned and left, his footsteps echoing down the driveway. Grandmother clutched her chest, gasping for air. The performance looked real enough that the officer called for an ambulance, buying her the sympathy she needed. Relatives rushed to her side while I stood there holding crying children, looking like the villain who'd given an old woman a heart attack. My 12-year-old cousin Mira tugged on my sleeve, her innocent eyes wide with confusion. She whispered that grandma had promised she'd get to help with special work soon, that she'd earn money for the family like the older girls. The social worker overheard and her face hardened. During the commotion, the officer noticed fresh bruises on Alicia's arms, purple fingerprints that wrapped around her thin limbs. He asked to photograph them but said he'd need a warrant first. The bruises matched exactly what Madhu had described to the hospital staff. The CPS workers decided to remove us immediately. As they led me to their car, neighbors gathered on their lawns, whispering behind their hands. I heard fragments of their conversations, about that troubled girl causing drama again, about how I'd always been jealous of my prettier cousins. The hospital corridor smelled like disinfectant and fear. Madhu lay unconscious, machines beeping around her. The doctor explained they needed grandmother's consent for a RP kit, but she was already there with her lawyer, insisting it would cause unnecessary trauma to a sick girl. Her performance was flawless, the concerned grandmother protecting her granddaughter from further violation. The lawyer, a man in an expensive suit, already had a folder about me. He showed the social worker my high school records, the counselor's notes about self-harm, the scars on my arms that I'd hidden for years. He used words like attention-seeking behavior and unstable personality, painting me as a disturbed teenager lashing out at a loving family. My phone buzzed constantly. The family group chat exploded with old photos, carefully selected to show me looking sullen at birthday parties while my cousins opened expensive gifts. They shared screenshots of times I'd complained about unfair treatment, twisting teenage frustration into evidence of jealousy and resentment. I tried reaching out to distant relatives on Facebook, desperate for someone to believe me, but grandmother was faster. Those messages were screenshot and shared as evidence of my harassment campaign against an elderly woman who'd done nothing but love her grandchildren. Then I discovered the worst part. Grandmother still paid my phone bill. She could see every call I made to CPS, every text to the detective. When she called that evening, her voice was sweet as honey. She asked why I was making so many calls, Beta, why I was trying so hard to hurt the family. After 48 hours without sleep, sitting in interview rooms and repeating my story, the details started blurring together. I confused which uncle had visited when, mixed up dates and times. The detective's expression grew more skeptical with each mistake. I looked unreliable, unstable, exactly how grandmother wanted me to appear. My best friend's mother called to say they couldn't see me anymore. Grandmother had called them crying, explaining how I was making false accusations, how I'd always been troubled. My friend texted me secretly later, saying her mom believed grandmother, not me. The first crack in my outside support system. The town began dividing. At the grocery store, one cashier refused to ring up my items, turning her back when I approached her lane. But another customer slipped a $20 bill into my hand as I left, whispering for me to stay strong. Small acts of kindness amid an ocean of judgment. Grandmother's lawyer presented evidence that she'd helped with college tuition for several family members. Technically true, she had paid for Priya's nursing classes. They painted her as a generous matriarch supporting her family's education, not a woman selling children for profit. My chemistry teacher needed grandmother's famous samosa recipe for the school fundraiser. She approached me carefully, trying to stay neutral while making it clear she couldn't take sides. The whole town was watching, choosing their positions in this family war. The laptop password investigation revealed something that made my skin crawl. Grandmother had used my birthday because she genuinely saw me as special, the one granddaughter smart enough to continue the family business. Her twisted affection made everything worse, showing she'd been grooming me for management, not service. Someone photographed me smiling at a coffee shop while getting my morning caffeine. Within hours, the image spread online with captions about how I could laugh while Madhu lay dying in the hospital. They didn't know I'd been awake for 3 days, that the smile was exhaustion making me delirious. Grandmother's final text that week was simple but chilling. You've killed me. The words stared at me from my phone screen as I realized this would only end with someone in jail or someone in the ground. I stared at those 3 words on my phone screen until my vision blurred. My hands trembled as I set the device aside and focused on survival. The next morning brought Uncle Vikram to my workplace, his arm wrapped around my newest coworker McCatherine. She giggled at his jokes while he positioned himself perfectly to watch my every move behind the coffee counter. He ordered slowly, asking McCatherine about the staff schedules, mentioning how I seemed stressed lately. My manager noticed the tension and pulled me aside, suggesting I take a break. Grandmother's next move came through the detective assigned to our case. He called me in for another interview, this time focusing on my mental state. He'd received reports that I'd been obsessed with being chosen for the family business, that I felt rejected when prettier cousins were selected instead. The accusation hit like a physical blow. I tried explaining the truth, but my words tangled together, exhaustion making me stumble over basic facts. My old journal became their weapon. Grandmother's lawyer had somehow obtained entries from when I was 14, pages where I'd written about feeling left out, wondering why Priya got everything. Normal teenage jealousy twisted into evidence of a disturbed mind seeking revenge. The lawyer read my own words back to me, each sentence recontextualized as proof of my supposed vendetta. Meanwhile, my 8-year-old cousin had started telling her teacher about Grandma's promises. The little girl excitedly explained how she'd soon help the family earn money, just like the big girls did. The teacher's face went white. Another call to CPS, another investigation opened, but Grandmother was ready. She arrived at the school with cookies and tears, explaining how I'd been filling the children's heads with terrible ideas. The security footage from our neighbor's house became crucial evidence, though not in the way I'd hoped. The cameras showed young girls entering Grandmother's house regularly, but without audio, it simply looked like family visits. No signs of distress visible from the street, no evidence of anything beyond a loving grandmother hosting her grandchildren. The prosecutor reviewed the tapes and shook his head. Family court arrived faster than expected. The judge, a stern woman with silver hair, questioned why I'd waited so long to make accusations. Why now, after years of supposed abuse? I tried explaining about finding the laptop, about finally understanding what was happening, but my timeline had holes. Stress had scrambled my memories. Dates didn't line up perfectly. The judge's expression grew increasingly skeptical. That evening, I discovered something that made my stomach turn. Using my mother's old Amazon account, I searched Grandmother's purchase history. Hidden among household items were orders for lingerie in children's sizes. The descriptions made me nauseous. Special occasion wear, for petite frames. Each order corresponded with dates from her booking calendar. I screenshot everything, my hands shaking. Grandmother's Venmo account told another story. Payments from uncle friends with emoji-filled descriptions that seemed innocent to outsiders. Birthday cake emojis, heart symbols, celebration icons. But the amounts and timing matched the old records perfectly. 500 here, 300 there, always the day after a child had visited. I documented every transaction, building my own spreadsheet of evidence. My teenage therapy notes became their next tool against me. Sessions where I talked about feeling unsafe at home, about wanting to run away, were presented as typical teenage angst. The therapist had written adjustment disorder and mild depression, never suspecting the real cause. Now those clinical terms were used to paint me as mentally unstable, prone to false memories and persecution complexes. I attempted to record Grandmother during a family gathering, hiding my phone in my pocket, but she spotted the device immediately. Her scream pierced the air as she clutched her chest, wailing about her ungrateful granddaughter trying to entrap her. Relatives rushed to comfort her while glaring at me with disgust. The recording captured only her cries of betrayal, nothing incriminating. Work became impossible. Court dates and emergency hearings meant missed shifts. My manager finally pulled me aside, explaining that the drama was affecting business. Customers had complained about the family controversy. He handed me my final paycheck with apologetic eyes. Another source of stability gone. Another victory for Grandmother's campaign. The hardest blow came from Madhu's mother. Sitting in the hospital waiting room, she explained her impossible position. Grandmother paid for Madhu's specialized medical care. The experimental treatments insurance wouldn't cover. Without that money, her daughter might die. She looked at me with hollow eyes and made her choice. She would support whatever story Grandmother told. I noticed Grandmother wearing my mother's wedding jewelry at the next family gathering. The gold necklace that was supposed to be mine gleamed against her sari. When I confronted her, she smiled sadly and explained that my mother had given it to her before she died. A gift of gratitude for all the support over the years. Relatives nodded, remembering how close they'd been. The offer came through my father. Grandmother would forgive everything if I simply recanted my story. Admit I'd been confused, traumatized by my mother's death, lashing out at the family who loved me. She'd even pay for therapy, help me get back on my feet. All I had to do was tell the police I'd made a mistake. My father delivered the message with tears in his eyes, begging me to consider it. My refusal fractured the family further. Aunts who'd been neutral now saw me as choosing revenge over healing. They whispered about my selfishness, how I was destroying the family from within. Even cousins who'd suffered alongside me began to distance themselves, afraid of being associated with the troublemaker who wouldn't let things go. Then came the revelation about Uncle Raj. I'd always assumed he was part of the system, another user, but hidden in my mother's old files, I found evidence of his payments to Grandmother, not for access to children, but bribes attempting to get specific girls removed from the program. He'd been trying to save them, working within the twisted system to protect who he could. My assumptions had been wrong. The voicemails changed everything. My father led me to the garage one evening, pulling out an old flip phone hidden behind paint cans. My mother's voice filled the dusty space, shaky but determined. Message after message of her negotiating with Grandmother, trying to find a way to end the program without destroying the family. She'd been fighting from within, documenting everything, building her own case. The last message was dated 3 days before her OD. Her diary confirmed what the voicemail suggested. Page after page of careful documentation, plans to approach authorities, evidence she'd gathered over years, but also her growing despair as she realized how deep the corruption ran, how many officials were involved. The final entry was a goodbye, acknowledging she couldn't win this fight but hoping someone else might. My father faced an impossible choice. His dialysis treatments cost more than Medicare covered. Grandmother supplemented the expenses, keeping him alive. Supporting me meant losing that help, potentially dying. He made his decision publicly, standing with Grandmother at family events, but privately, he slipped me more evidence. Photographs my mother had hidden, names of potential allies. I began stalking Grandmother's doctor, learning his routines, engineering casual encounters. Slowly, I built rapport, mentioning my concern for my elderly grandmother's health. He revealed more than he should have, prescription patterns that didn't match her claimed conditions, anxiety medications and doses that suggested distribution, not personal use, pain pills that no elderly woman should need in such quantities. Mr. Sharma's daughter became my next target. I orchestrated an accidental meeting at the mall, striking up conversation about school. She was bright, talkative, eager for attention. Within minutes, she was telling me about her father's special friends, the pretty girls who visited when mommy wasn't home. Her innocent words confirmed what I'd suspected. The abuse extended beyond our family. Grandmother's Facebook provided a goldmine before she made it private. I screenshot everything. Photos from family gatherings where young girls sat on older men's laps, comments that seemed innocent but carried dark undertones, check-ins at hotels that matched dates from her calendar. The digital trail was extensive once you knew what to look for. My mother's AA sponsor appeared like a vulture, claiming my mother had confessed everything during recovery meetings. She wanted money for her silence, threatening to go to Grandmother with tales of my mother's final plans. I spent precious resources keeping her quiet, money I couldn't afford to lose. Each payment felt like betrayal of my mother's memory. The cost of fighting back multiplied. I missed Alicia's school play while dealing with the blackmailer. She'd needed me there, one stable adult in her chaotic life. Instead, she performed to an audience of enablers and abusers. When I tried to apologize later, she wouldn't make eye contact. Another relationship sacrificed to this war. Legal fees drained my credit cards. The lawyer explained that cases like this required extensive documentation, expert witnesses, psychological evaluations. Each meeting cost hundreds I didn't have. Meanwhile, Grandmother used the rental income to fund her defense, hiring the best attorneys money money could buy. The financial imbalance felt insurmountable. My confrontation at Madhu's hospital room went badly. Raised voices disturbed other patients. Nurses called security. I found myself escorted out while grandmother remained, the concerned relative at her granddaughter's bedside. The medical staff saw her as the stable family member, me as the disruptive influence. Another public relations victory for her campaign. Losing my retail job meant scrambling for income. Applications went nowhere once employers Googled my name. The family controversy had made me unemployable in our small town. I picked up odd jobs, cleaning houses, anything that paid cash. But court dates interfered with even these irregular schedules. Managers grew tired of my absences, my exhaustion, my drama. Homelessness loomed until a friend offered her basement. I slept on a moldy mattress while grandmother hosted family dinners in my childhood home. She cooked in the kitchen where I'd first found courage to speak out, served meals in the dining room where we'd planned resistance. The irony burned like acid in my throat. My mother's sister, one of the few relatives who'd shown kindness, begged me to reconsider. She sat beside me on a park bench, tears streaming down her face, reminding me that my mother wouldn't want this. The family destruction, the public shame, the children caught in crossfire. Her words carried weight because she'd loved my mother too, understood the cost of this fight. The investigation's ripple effects spread beyond our family. Alicia's teacher, a mandatory reporter, struggled with guilt over missing signs. The stress affected her pregnancy. She developed complications requiring bed rest. Her husband blamed her for not protecting students, for being too trusting. Their marriage counseling sessions became another casualty of our family's poison. I watched the teacher's marriage crumble and questioned my choices. Was exposing the truth worth destroying innocent lives? But then I'd remember Sunita's tears, Madhu's bruises, the generations of girls sacrificed to maintain family harmony. The investigation had to continue, regardless of collateral damage. My only supportive cousin asked the question that haunted me. What if grandmother genuinely believed she was helping? What if, in her twisted worldview, this system had saved the family from poverty and dissolution? The question left me speechless because I'd seen the pride in her eyes when showing me the spreadsheets. She truly thought she'd created something beneficial. Establishing credibility meant admitting my own crimes. I confessed to stealing money from grandmother when I was 15, desperate to buy school supplies she deemed unnecessary. The admission felt like swallowing glass, but it established a pattern of truth-telling that the prosecutor said might help. Every revelation stripped away another piece of my dignity. Hospital records revealed a damning detail. I'd brought Madhu to the emergency room after her worst assault, but left before answering questions. Fear had driven me away. Terror of confronting the system. Now that abandonment was used against me. If I truly cared, why hadn't I stayed? Why hadn't I reported it then? My cowardice became evidence of fabrication. Grandmother's lawyer filed motions to expedite proceedings while my key witness was conveniently absent. Priya had suddenly needed to visit India for a family emergency. Her ticket purchased by grandmother. The timing was too perfect, removing the one cousin who might have corroborated my story. Without her testimony, my case weakened significantly. The generational pattern emerged through research. Grandmother's own childhood in poverty-stricken India included similar arrangements. Her mother had made comparable choices, trading daughter's innocence for family survival. The cycle stretched back generations, each woman believing she was protecting her family through sacrifice. Understanding didn't excuse it, but it explained the depth of her conviction. My grandfather's deathbed became another battlefield. He was fading fast, cancer eating away at his body. I needed his confession, his acknowledgement of what they'd built together. But recording a dying man felt monstrous. I sat beside his hospital bed with my phone hidden, listening to his labored breathing, watching tears roll down his wrinkled cheeks. His whispered admissions broke my heart even as I documented them. The person I'd been before, trusting, optimistic, believing in family bonds, died during those months. I learned to manipulate conversations, extract information through calculated emotional appeals. I became someone who could smile while planning the next strategic move. The investigation hadn't just exposed our family's darkness, it had transformed me into someone capable of navigating it. Mr. Sharma's daughter provided crucial evidence during a babysitting session. While she played with dolls, I scrolled through her tablet, finding texts between her parents discussing custody arrangements. Her mother's messages revealed knowledge of the visits, the special friends, the reasons for divorce. I screenshot everything, hating myself for violating a child's privacy, but knowing these messages could save others. Small victories felt hollow against larger losses. Proving one financial transaction matched a documented visit meant nothing when grandmother collapsed at home. I performed CPR on the woman I was trying to imprison, pumping life back into the chest that had orchestrated so much pain. Relatives found us like that, me saving her while simultaneously trying to destroy her. The optics were devastating. Grandmother's recovery room became a stage for her final performance. She told visitors I'd orchestrated everything for attention, that my jealousy had driven me to create elaborate false memories. Relatives who'd wavered in their support now rallied around her hospital bed. The grandmother who'd saved my life became proof of my ingratitude, my cruelty, my delusion. Everything hinged on Madhu waking up. The doctors had induced a coma to help her heal, but her testimony would make or break the case. I spent hours in the hospital chapel, praying to gods I'd stopped believing in, begging for her recovery and her memory. Without her voice, everything else was circumstantial. The other girls were too young or too scared to testify effectively. I started tutoring my younger cousin in mathematics, one of the few family connections I maintained. His struggles with algebra became leverage when his parents reminded me how I'd helped him pass, how I'd been part of his success. Why would I destroy his grandmother, his family's stability, his future? The emotional manipulation was masterful, using my love for the children against me. The local detective believed my story but explained the prosecutorial challenges. Grooming cases required victim cooperation. When families closed ranks, when victims were taught to see abuse as love, convictions became nearly impossible. He'd seen it before. Entire families protecting predators because the alternative meant destruction. His weary eyes reflected years of similar failures. A reporter who'd covered comparable cases met me in a diner outside town. She listened to my story with practiced neutrality, taking notes without judgment. Her article would be carefully worded, protecting identities while exposing patterns. But without concrete proof, without named sources, it would be just another vague warning about family secrets. The system protected itself through silence. The published article confirmed my worst fears. Similar cases across the country ended without convictions when families united against accusers. Grandmothers, grandfathers, trusted relatives who'd built elaborate systems of abuse, all protected by family loyalty and financial dependence. The reporter included statistics that made me nauseous. We weren't unique, we were typical. My mother's death took on new meaning as prescription levels were re-examined. The OD that had seemed accidental now looked deliberate. Therapeutic levels of anxiety medication, mixed with carefully calculated amounts of pain pills. She'd known exactly what she was doing. The medical examiner revised his report, noting the suspicious precision of the substance combination. Evidence of my mother's investigation surfaced in her abandoned car. Hidden beneath the spare tire were photographs she'd taken over years. Images of girls being prepared, dressed in adult clothing, makeup applied to child faces. One photo showed me at 10, lipstick smeared across my mouth, wearing a dress that exposed too much skin. I didn't remember the moment, had blocked it out, but the camera had captured everything. A sewer slide note emerged from the envelope of photographs. My mother's handwriting, shaky but clear, explaining her failure to stop the cycle. She'd tried everything. Documentation, negotiation, threats of exposure, but the system was too entrenched, the participants too numerous, the financial incentives too strong. Her death was her final protest, hoping someone would continue the fight. I committed to finishing what she'd started, regardless of personal cost. The investigation would continue even if it meant losing everything. My mother had died believing change was impossible. I would prove her wrong, even if victory looked like mutual destruction. Some families deserve to burn. Grandmother's deposition contained provable lies. She claimed never to have taken money directly, insisting all payments went through intermediaries. But the Venmo screenshots showed otherwise. Direct transfers with her name, her account, her bank. The prosecutor's eyes lit up as he reviewed the evidence. Financial crimes were easier to prove than abuse. I presented the financial pattern in court without emotion, reading numbers like grocery lists. Each transaction corresponded to a child's visit. Each payment matched the old calendar entries. The judge's expression shifted from skepticism to concern as the pattern emerged. Money told the story that testimonies couldn't. Mathematics didn't lie or forget or get confused under pressure. Grandmother's mouth moved silently as I spoke, forming words I couldn't hear. From across the courtroom, it looked like an apology, or maybe a curse. Her hands clutched rosary beads while mine unconsciously rubbed the scars on my arms. We'd both been marked by this system, just in different ways. The cycle had damaged everyone it touched. The detective presented his timeline showing escalation over the years. What had started as brief visits had evolved into overnight stays. Hospital records showed increasing injuries. Emergency room visits that corresponded with booking dates. The clinical presentation of data stripped away emotional arguments, leaving only facts. Children had been hurt, money had changed hands, patterns existed that couldn't be explained away. Mr. Sharma's ex-wife agreed to testify about finding inappropriate photographs on his computer. Her voice shook as she described protecting her daughter, filing for divorce, fighting for sole custody. She'd known about the family business but had stayed silent until it threatened her own child. Her testimony carried weight because she'd been complicit before choosing protection. The judge ordered psychological evaluations for all minor cousins still in the home. Social workers would interview each child, assess their understanding of appropriate boundaries, determine therapeutic needs. The order felt like victory, even as I knew the evaluations would traumatize already damaged children. Progress required pain. Healing demanded exposure. Text messages between family members were authenticated and entered into evidence. Conversations about payment rates, availability schedules, preferences for specific children. The casual nature of the discussions chilled the courtroom. They'd texted about selling children like planning dinner parties. The banality of evil documented in emoji and abbreviations. Evidence of grandmother's twisted love emerged through gift receipts. After each visit, she'd buy the affected child presents. Dolls for the youngest, electronics for teenagers, always with cards calling them special. The prosecution argued this showed consciousness of guilt, attempts to buy silence and compliance. The defense claimed it showed a loving grandmother spoiling her grandchildren. Grandmother's breakdown on the stand seemed genuine. She sobbed about saving the family from starvation, about her own mother's choices in India, about tradition and survival and sacrifice. Her tears were real even if her justification was warped. She truly believed she'd protected the family through systematic abuse. The conviction in her voice made several jurors shift uncomfortably. I was given the opportunity to deliver a victim impact statement. Standing before the court, I spoke about generational trauma, about cycles that needed breaking regardless of cost. I asked for prison time but also mental health treatment. Grandmother was criminal and victim both. The system she'd perpetuated had started with her own childhood. Justice required accountability and compassion equally. Temporary custody arrangements removed the youngest cousins from the home. They would stay in state care while relatives were evaluated. I was approved as a visitor, allowed supervised time with the children I'd tried to protect. The victory felt partial, incomplete. We'd saved some while losing others. The family had shattered exactly as grandmother had warned. Extended family divided into factions. Half believed my accusations, supporting the investigation despite personal cost. The other half branded me a family destroyer, a jealous girl who'd invented memories for attention. Cousins faced choosing sides at school, in the community, at temple. The warfare spread beyond our immediate family, poisoning an entire network of relationships. I started therapy alongside the rescued cousins, group sessions where we learned to speak truth without shame. 2 jobs barely covered legal fees and living expenses. Some relatives served time while others cut contact completely. The family business had ended, but its destruction left casualties everywhere. We were free and broken simultaneously. Restraining orders became necessary as threats escalated. Uncles who'd lost access made their anger known. Aunts who'd lost income blamed me for their poverty. The protection felt thin against generations of rage. I varied my routes, checked locks obsessively, startled at unexpected sounds. Freedom came with perpetual fear. Madhu's eyes finally fluttered open as autumn arrived. Her memory was fragmented, confused, but present. She remembered enough. Her testimony would seal convictions, validate everything I'd sacrificed to expose. But watching her struggle to speak, seeing the damage reflected in her vacant stare, I wondered if victory was the right word for any of this. The courtroom felt smaller with each passing day. I watched jurors scribble notes during testimony, their faces revealing nothing. The prosecutor methodically presented financial records while I sat rigid in my seat, hands folded to hide their trembling. Each document projected on the screen represented a child's visit, a payment received, a life altered. The defense attorney attempted to discredit the evidence, suggesting the transactions were innocent family support, but the patterns were too consistent to ignore. My cousin's psychological evaluations arrived sealed in manila envelopes. The social worker explained the findings in clinical terms that sanitized the horror: delayed emotional development, inappropriate boundary understanding, trauma responses masked as compliance. Each report strengthened the prosecution's case while breaking my heart. These children I tried to protect were professionally documented as damaged goods. Grandmother's medical records subpoenaed from her doctor revealed the prescription fraud. Anxiety medications prescribed in quantities suggesting distribution, not personal use. The prosecutor traced med counts against pharmacy records, building a secondary case for substance trafficking. Her lawyer argued she'd been sharing medications with family members who couldn't afford healthcare, painting her as a compassionate elder helping struggling relatives. The judge called a recess when Madhu took the stand. Her voice barely reached the microphone as she recounted fragmented memories. The defense attorney's cross-examination felt like watching someone kick a wounded animal. He questioned her recollection, highlighted inconsistencies, suggested her injuries came from elsewhere. I gripped the bench until my knuckles went white, fighting the urge to intervene. Uncle Vikram's arrest happened during lunch break. Officers escorted him from the courthouse in handcuffs after McCatherine provided her statement about his attempts to gather information on me. She'd recorded their conversations, documented his questions about my schedule and mental state. The conspiracy to intimidate a witness charge would stick even if nothing else did. My father's testimony surprised everyone. He took the stand despite knowing it would cost him grandmother's financial support for his dialysis. His voice steady, he confirmed finding my mother's evidence, validated her investigation attempts, admitted his own cowardice in staying silent. The courtroom went silent when he revealed grandmother had threatened to withhold his medical funds if he supported me. The forensic accountant's presentation lasted 3 hours. Charts and graphs transformed our family's horror into digestible data points. Income streams from various uncles, payment schedules correlating with school holidays, escalating prices as children aged. The clinical presentation somehow made it worse, reducing human suffering to profit margins and market rates. Priya returned from India 2 days before closing arguments. Her appearance in court caused a stir. She'd lost weight, dark circles shadowed her eyes. She took the stand and systematically dismantled grandmother's defense. Her nursing training gave her testimony medical credibility as she described treating cousins' injuries, documenting abuse patterns, being threatened into silence. The prosecution's closing argument focused on the money trail. Follow the payments, follow the victims, follow the pattern spanning 3 generations. The defense countered with cultural explanations, poverty justifications, attacking my credibility as a jealous granddaughter seeking attention. They painted grandmother as a confused elder manipulated by a vindictive teenager. Jury deliberation stretched into its 3rd day when Mr. Sharma changed his plea. His lawyer negotiated a deal, guilty to lesser charges in exchange for testimony about the broader network. His statement implicated 4 other families, expanding the investigation beyond our immediate relatives. The prosecutor's office assigned additional investigators to follow these new leads. The verdict came on a Thursday afternoon. Guilty on 15 counts of child endangerment. Guilty on 3 counts of human trafficking. Guilty on multiple counts of financial fraud. Not guilty on the more severe charges that would have meant life imprisonment. Grandmother collapsed at the defense table, this time genuinely, requiring medical attention. Sentencing happened 2 weeks later. 8 years in state prison with possibility of parole in 5. The judge cited her age, health conditions, and own childhood trauma as mitigating factors. Mr. Sharma received 3 years for related charges. Uncle Vikram got 18 months for witness intimidation. Other relatives accepted plea deals for probation and mandatory counseling. The youngest cousin's custody hearings proceeded separately. 3 entered foster care when no suitable relatives could pass background checks. 2 others went to distant family members who'd been unaware of the business. I received approved visitor status for all 5, allowed supervised meetings twice monthly. The state would monitor their progress, provide therapy, attempt to break the cycle. Asset forfeiture proceedings began immediately. The government seized grandmother's house, the site of so many horrors. Bank accounts frozen pending investigation of money laundering charges. The family's financial structure, built on exploitation, crumbled within weeks. Relatives who depended on the income faced their own reckonings with poverty. I moved into a studio apartment near the domestic violence shelter where I'd found work. The night shifts allowed me to attend community college during the day, working toward a social work degree. My supervisor, herself a survivor, understood when I needed breaks during particularly difficult intake interviews. The work felt like penance and purpose combined. Group therapy with my cousins happened every Saturday morning. We sat in a circle in a cheerful room with painted butterflies on the walls, learning words for what had happened to us. The therapist guided us through exercises about body autonomy, healthy relationships, breaking shame cycles. Progress came slowly, measured in small victories like Mira raising her hand to speak. The civil lawsuit against the estate proceeded parallel to criminal cases. Lawyers worked pro bono, seeking damages for the victims. Whatever money recovered would go into trust funds for the children's education and therapy. The legal process would take years, but it established official recognition of harm done, compensation owed, justice sought through every available channel. My father's health deteriorated without grandmother's financial support. Medicare covered basic dialysis, but not the supplemental treatments he needed. I picked up extra shifts, contributed what I could, watched him fade despite our efforts. He died 6 months after testifying, finally free from the devil's bargain that had kept him alive but complicit. His funeral was small, attended only by those who'd chosen truth over family. The domestic violence shelter expanded their programming after our case. They developed specific protocols for familial trafficking, trained staff on generational abuse patterns, created support groups for survivors of interfamily exploitation. My story became a teaching tool, anonymized but powerful, helping other counselors recognize similar patterns. Other victims began coming forward. Inspired by our prosecutions, families in neighboring counties reported similar systems. The state attorney general's office opened a task force investigating organized familial abuse. Our case became a template, showing how financial evidence could prove what testimony alone couldn't establish. The investigation would continue for years. I testified at grandmother's parole hearing after 3 years. I spoke about the ongoing damage, the cousins still in therapy, the family members who'd never recovered, but I also acknowledged her own victimization, the cycle she'd inherited and perpetuated. I asked the board to require extensive psychiatric treatment as a condition of any release. They denied parole but mandated mental health evaluation. The shelter promoted me to overnight supervisor. I trained new volunteers, developed intake protocols, supervised the crisis hotline. My own story informed my work without defining it. I learned to recognize the signs I'd missed in my own family. The control disguised as love, the exploitation wrapped in tradition, the silence enforced through financial dependence. Madhu graduated high school despite everything. I attended her ceremony, watched her walk across the stage in cap and gown, remembered the broken girl in the hospital bed. She planned to study psychology, wanting to understand what had happened to us all. Her acceptance letter to State University felt like victory against everyone who'd tried to destroy her future. The house where I'd grown up was demolished. The new owners, unaware of its history, built a modern duplex on the lot. I drove past occasionally, watching construction progress, seeing physical erasure of our painful history. The shed where we'd gathered to find our voices became a garage. The kitchen where everything exploded transformed into someone else's breakfast nook. 5 years after that birthday party, I stood in a courthouse again, this time as a guardian ad litem, advocating for children caught in custody disputes. My supervisor had recommended me for the training, saying my background gave me unique insight. I accepted the responsibility knowing every case would echo my own family's destruction. Alicia aged out of foster care on her 18th birthday. I helped her move into transitional housing, apply for community college, access therapy services. She decided to study early childhood education, wanting to be the teacher who noticed warning signs. We unpacked her few belongings in silence, both remembering the little girl with bruised arms who'd needed protection. The investigation's ripple effects continued spreading. Families I'd never heard of faced scrutiny as financial patterns emerged. Banks implemented new reporting requirements for suspicious transfers involving minors. Schools developed better training for recognizing trafficking indicators. Small changes accumulated, creating barriers against future exploitation. Some relatives maintained grandmother's innocence despite convictions. They sent letters calling me a family destroyer, blaming me for poverty and separation. I stopped reading them after the first year, forwarding them unopened to my lawyer for documentation. Their anger felt small compared to the freedom we'd gained through truth. The monthly support group met in the basement of a community center. Survivors of familial abuse gathered to share experiences and coping strategies. I facilitated discussions, provided resources, connected people with services. My cousins attended when they could, their presence reminding me why the fight had been necessary. Sunita started college with a full scholarship from the Victim Compensation Fund. Mira entered high school with confidence I'd never imagined possible. The younger ones progressed through therapy, learning to trust adults again. We'd saved them from the system if not from its effects. Breaking generational trauma required destroying the family that perpetuated it. Some chains had to be shattered regardless of cost.
BF claimed he was temporarily living with his ex while looking for his own place, but after 2 years I still couldn't visit him or meet his friends. But then I found out I was the side chick. Tim and I have been together for 2 years. We are both foreigners living in Europe. Names have been changed. Tim is a very private person in general, and so maybe some of the strangeness stems from that. In order to explain everything, I think I have to start at the very beginning. Tim and I met at an event for native English speakers after each of us having lived here for a year. We hit it off immediately. Later that week we went to a pub crawl with other people from the event and hooked up. Only a few days later we decided to meet up again, but when trying to decide if it'd be at my place or his, he told me it has to be mine and he'll explain why later. For the record, I do not live in an ideal situation to be having people, much less men, over, and he was completely aware of the situation. He came over and told me that he is currently still living with his ex-girlfriend of about 3 months. He had his own room and everything, but because he had prepaid for 6 months of rent to lend her some money, he was staying there. Okay, so yeah, I know this is weird. But who am I to judge? He says they are definitely broken up and I'm just sleeping with the guy right now, so whatever. A few weeks go by, and we decide to start dating exclusively and officially. He says he's just living with his ex, who we'll name Stephanie, temporarily for another 3 months, and then he'll find another place. Alright, so it's a weird situation, but I trust him, and he'll leave in 3 months. He complains about having to live with her and says it's uncomfortable. He also told me why they broke up, which was because he caught her cheating on him with her ex at a party. So I'm not worried about them getting back together. I'm not 100% comfortable with the situation, but it's manageable. A few months pass and Tim doesn't move out. He says he's now got his own little apartment in the same house, but that it's so much better for him to stay there because he doesn't have to buy any furniture and the rent is cheap. Remember, we're foreigners, so buying a ton of furniture that you're just going to have to sell when you leave is annoying. He eventually starts saying that he's going to bring me over there to show me that they're living separately and whatnot. Long story short, that never happened. Every time I asked him to ask her about it, he'd say that she'd get upset and blah blah blah. Apparently she was aware that he had a girlfriend, but didn't like it and wanted to get back together. After a year, he finally moved out. Not into his own place, but into the spare room at his buddy's house. I had been to this buddy's place before, only once, though, and that has been the one and only time I've ever met one of his non-mutual friends, which is suspicious and strange on its own. I didn't help with the move, not for lack of trying, so no, I never saw him move his stuff there. Again, this was a temporary solution until he found a place of his own. Through various circumstances, company being bought out which lead to job insecurity, him being extremely picky about finding an apartment, he is still yet to move into a place of his own. It's been about 10 months since he moved into his buddy's place, and I've yet to be there, even though I've asked many times. He always says yes, but then later says that he doesn't want to intrude or be a nuisance, etc. So essentially, I've never seen where he lives. Those things, along with me never having met his friends or Skyped with his family, are the underlying basis for my suspicion, but here's where the real stuff comes. Last night, when I couldn't sleep, I went Facebook stalking. I searched for tagged photos of Tim because I know he's weird about his Facebook and doesn't let tagged pictures and posts show up on his wall. While going through the pictures, I found 3 pictures of him while he was visiting home over the summer. In each of the 3 pictures, there is a girl, who is untagged, and sitting next to Tim. In 2 of the 3 pictures his arm is around her, but the pictures are more posed and everyone's arms are around each other. 2 of the pictures are with friends, so I figured she's a friend from home, no big deal. In 1 picture though, they are with his sister and her husband and daughter. So a much more intimate picture. I do not know what Stephanie looks like, and she doesn't have Facebook. I can't find a picture of her through Googling. But I think this girl might be her. I don't know exactly why I think that, but I do. I did some more Google research and found Stephanie's grandmother's obituary. She died in January. So after Tim would have moved out of the house and definitely after they should have been broken up. And yet, on the obituary his name is listed next to Stephanie's as members of the family. I do know that he was close to the grandmother and that she left him stuff in her will, but still I'm suspicious. If what I suspect is true, that means that he was able to hide this from me and her for 2 years, which is honestly just impressive. Right now, though, I'm stuck. I don't want to bring up my relatively weak evidence with him until I can be sure, because he'll just have an excuse and I'll just accept it because I want to trust him and be with him. I don't know how to get any more proof that the girl in the pictures is Stephanie or how to know for sure one way or the other. So that's where I'd like advice. I'm not going to break up with him without knowing 100% because I honestly do love him, but I don't know how I can know 100%. Any advice or help is appreciated. Although please be constructive. Update 1. So, it's been a while. The story was developing and I didn't want to update without knowing anything for sure. I never expected my post to get so much attention, and minus the few comments and PMs about being a slut, I really appreciate all of the input everyone had, and I read every single comment and message. So first off, thanks to everyone. As many people suggested I do, I started with a conversation with Tim, where I made very clear how much the whole situation bothered me and why it was an issue for me. I tried to show him things from my perspective and tried to make him understand why I was so upset. He said he understood and apologized profusely. He cried and I cried. He said it was never his intention to hurt me and that he hadn't realized this had been such a large issue for me, and that he had been selfish about it. He said it was all going to change and that I would meet his friends and see where he's staying, and get to Skype with his family, etc., etc. He said I was the most important part of his life here and that he can't imagine his life without me in it. He said he wants to find an apartment for us to live together and that when I'm done with school, he wants to go back home together for good. He also told me that the girl in the pictures was an old family friend, and that he was in the obituary because he still is close with the family and they still wish I was a part of the family. I decided to wait and see if he actually held up his end of things this time, and so we made up and all was well. What I didn't mention is that during my snooping phase before this conversation, I found the phone number to the landline where Stephanie lives and decided to give it a call asking for Tim. Stephanie's dad answered, and when I asked for Tim, he told me to call his cell phone because this was the landline. So, not exactly helpful. Before you guys freak out about the dad thing, the house is like a duplex where the parents have their own half and Stephanie has her own half. This is not uncommon in small villages here. A couple days after Tim and I talked, he texted me asking if I had called Stephanie's house asking for him. I decided not to lie and admitted it. He said that she texted him saying that some girl with an accent had called the house asking for him and he immediately thought that it must have been me. I explained that I did it because I felt desperate for answers and just wanted to know what was going on. I also told him that it was inconclusive. He got very upset and said I had betrayed his trust and that I was acting like an insane person. He isn't exactly wrong about that part, but I explained that I felt forced to take such actions because I felt like I was never going to get any answers any other way. I apologized for the invasion of privacy and for bothering Stephanie and her family. After a few days, he calmed down and forgave me, saying however, that this may push back me meeting his friends because he told them what happened and they were pissed that I would treat him that way. I waited a few weeks to see if anything would change and unsurprisingly, it did not. So, this past weekend, he got very drunk one night and I was able to open his phone with his fingerprint while he was sleeping. I found texts from Stephanie from the day before talking about what they should make for dinner that night. He told me he was out of town for work that night. I found lots of hearts and I love yous and even him using the same pet names for her as he does for me. He told her he was going out of town this weekend for work and how much he'd miss her. I looked through the past few weeks of messages between them and saw that he had sent her quite a few of the same pictures that he had sent me. He had invited her to have a glass of wine with his buddy and her girlfriend. He picked her up from work multiple times, and there were lots of conversations about who was making dinner that night and what they should eat. I went back and looked for dates where I knew he had slept over with me and he had always told her he was crashing at a friend's place or out of town for work or something along those lines. I also found a group text message titled Family that included Tim, his sister, his mom, and Stephanie. I looked at pictures of Stephanie that she had sent him and was able to very obviously see that it was her in the pictures that I found on Facebook. So you guys were right. For the last 2 years, he's been living with her and seeing me on the side. All the while telling me how much he loves and admires me and how we're going to have a future together. I have been duped and taken advantage of. And I feel like a complete idiot because of it. I haven't talked to him yet, but when he comes over later in the week, I plan to tell him that I know everything. I also plan to tell him that he is a complete asshole. In my ideal conversation, he'd explain to me why he did this and what the fuck he was thinking during all this, but I am pretty sure those are just things that I'll never know or understand. Obviously I will break up with him. I also plan on contacting Stephanie with a letter telling my side of the story. I will give her dates that I know he spent the night with me, so that she can cross-check them with dates that he did not come home. I also plan to include a USB stick with pictures of Tim and me from the last 2 years and screenshots of some of our conversations from the last couple months. I can't make her believe me, but I want to at least do my best for her. I feel like I owe it to her as a fellow human being to let her know what kind of man she's been with for the last 4 years. I am open to absolutely any advice on my plan and on how to move forward from this. I won't lie, I feel so lost and so helpless right now. By breaking up with Tim, I'm losing a huge part of my life in this country, and I'm definitely going to be feeling this hole for a while. So any help is appreciated. Thank you guys so much for listening and sorry this is long AF. I got carried away. Update 2. Again, I'd like to start off this post with a thank you to everyone who responded with constructive and helpful advice. I read every comment, reply, and PM. So, I took your advice and did not try to have a conversation with Tim. I realized that since he was so successfully able to manipulate me for 2 years, having one last conversation with him was bound to end up with me doubting my findings and perhaps my sanity. I wrote Stephanie a 3-page letter, detailing the relationship that Tim and I have had over the past 2 years. Making clear that it was serious and not just a fling. I mentioned dates and events that most people would not have known about, and I included the intricate lies and backstory that he had told me. I included a list of dates from the last 2 months that he spent the night with me and encouraged her to cross-check them with nights that he wasn't at home. I printed out a few photos of us as a quick visible proof, and I included the rest of the photos on a USB stick in the letter. The stick also contained screenshots of any particularly incriminating conversations that we've had over the last few months. I scanned postcards that he had sent me from various vacations and included those as well. For safe measure, I also included a copy of the letter, in case the hard copy went somehow mysteriously missing. I gave her my email address and phone number and asked her to contact me if she wanted to. On Wednesday night, I had someone drive me to where she lives. If Tim was there, I would just have confirmations that he actually lives there and we'd leave. If he wasn't there, I'd ring the doorbell and hand her the letter personally. We drove the 45 kilometers and Tim was sitting there in the living room on his laptop. It was obvious he lived there. She was nowhere to be seen. His and her names were on the mailbox. I called to see if he'd pick up and he ignored the call. We headed back home. On Thursday morning, I mailed the letter. I ensured that it was registered post. In order to receive the letter, she'd have to show her ID and sign for it. On Friday, the letter arrived. She was not home, so she received a notification to go pick the letter up at the post office. On Saturday morning, she picked it up and I got an email of the receipt with her signature on it. Throughout all of this, I conversed normally with Tim and made excuses as to why he couldn't come over during the week, so as to not tip him off to anything. He stopped talking to me about 20 minutes after she picked up the letter Saturday morning, and I have not heard from him since. He has, however, defriended me and my family on Facebook. I have not heard from Stephanie either. So, now it's really over. I hope with my whole heart that he was not able to lie and manipulate his way out of the situation with her, but I will probably never know. I do not expect to hear from him again. I feel very lonely, taken advantage of, and beaten down. I am going to do my best to try to come out of this situation without trust issues and without being cynical and jaded. I am seeking therapy to make sure I don't slip into depression. For now, I need to find ways to distract myself and fill up any free time. Thanks again for all your help. This really sucks, but I'll get through it and hopefully be a stronger person for it. Quick edit, I forgot to mention that I'm going to go get tested on Tuesday to be safe. Obviously, if anything comes out of that, I'll do my best to notify both of them. Next story. Coworker who is married with kids started getting friendly because we live in the same neighborhood, but then he told me my hot librarian look was a problem for him and made it sound like I was flirting with him. I started a new job this summer around the same time as another coworker, Mac. Our office is one where we're often up and moving between different areas to complete tasks, so there's a fair amount of brief socialization that goes on as paths intersect. Mac and I have started to gravitate to each other often in that context. I had assumed it was because we're some of the only employees in the same particular stage of life, married with kids the same age, similar lifestyles. We even discovered we live in the same neighborhood, just a few streets apart. But Max said something to me this morning that has me scrutinizing all of our past interactions and unsure how to move forward. He said, "You have this whole sexy librarian thing going on today, and I think it's a problem for me." His statement was made with a bit of a smirk and a raised eyebrow, and it came across like he was making a pass at me. Now I'm looking back at all of our past interactions and wondering if I've been giving the wrong signals. I make no secret of the fact that I'm happily married and I love my husband, but I talk to Mac more than any other coworker. I'm also open, friendly, and quick to smile, but I'm like that with everyone. Even our clientele regularly comment on my upbeat and smiley demeanor, and I am definitely not flirting with any of them. Not on purpose at least. Now I don't know. I don't know what I'm supposed to do from here. In the moment, I laughed it off and kept moving to where I was going without comment. I did do my hair and makeup a little differently today and wore my oft-neglected glasses, so maybe I won't do that combination of things again. I don't want Mac to think I'm interested in a clandestine office romance, but I don't know how I should act around him going forward. I'm not very good at turning off the happy that apparently reads as flirty. Update 1. I have an update regarding my coworker, Mac, who told me my sexy librarian vibe was a problem for him. Reading your response and all the comments was very illuminating. I had been feeling as if I'd somehow brought it upon myself, but you and the commentariat really opened my eyes to the reality of this being entirely on Mac. I'm a little ashamed to admit I was too chicken to bring it up to Mac directly, but I made a point of avoiding his usual paths and successfully dodged him for 2 weeks straight. Last Friday he came to my workstation and asked if everything was alright, and said, "I feel like you've been avoiding me." Well, I took a deep breath, summoned all the resting bitch face I could muster, and said, Mac, you implied that your inability to manage your pants feels in the workplace was somehow my fault for looking like a sexy librarian. How exactly would you suggest I handle such gross comments in the future if not with avoidance? His neck and ears turned bright red and he said something along the lines of, I'm sorry. I didn't. Sorry. Then literally turned heel and fast walked away. I think I was in a state of nervous shock afterwards. My ears were ringing and I felt strangely tingly, but also incredibly proud of myself. First thing Monday morning, Mac came to my workstation again and gave me what seemed to be a sincere apology. He said there was no excuse for his comment, it was out of line and he was being an idiot not thinking of the implications, that it would never happen again, and asked if there was any way he could make it up to me. I thanked him for apologizing and said I don't think this is something that you really make up to someone, but to please truly ensure he never says anything like that again. He reiterated it would absolutely never happen again and asked if I thought I could ever forgive him. I told him that while I accept his apology, it'll take time to move forward and that I don't really know what that will look like and to please give me space and time. Summing it up with it'll be what it'll be, please don't try to force it, he said, of course. Again, I'm so sorry, and left my workstation. I think I need some time to process Mac's apology and how I feel about him moving forward. I'm still struggling to reconcile the friend I thought I knew with the lecher that made that comment and now with the seemingly penitent dope I saw today. People are complicated. But I at least feel like I can go back to taking whatever route I want to get from point A to point B and I won't be walking on eggshells worried about potentially running into him. I think we can exchange trivialities and move about without issue now. Thank you so much for your response, and to the commentariat as well. Update 2. I am a religious reader of Alm and love update season. I thought you all might enjoy another update on my situation with Mac. I can't believe it's been over a year. Mac never said anything sexualizing or out of line to me again. We never got back to the kind of easy work friendship we had previously, but things were cordial and while not necessarily warm they weren't chilly either. Unfortunately something eventually came out that likely cements his comments as less innocent than he portrayed them in his apology. He was having an affair and his wife is divorcing him. He's moved out of the neighborhood and no longer works here, which I'm grateful for. This new development definitely made it harder to assume he didn't know exactly what he was doing with his comments. Thanks again for opening my eyes last year and to all the commenters that helped me find my gumption. I still can't believe I pulled that line with a straight face, and it still feels amazing that I did. And thanks for all the wisdom and entertainment over the years. Can't wait to keep reading more.
My crazy mother-in-law tried sabotaging my entire career because I refused to perform surgery on my brother-in-law for free. I cut contact with them, so they started harassing me and my wife. I'm a doctor, and recently my mother-in-law asked me to perform surgery on her son for free, but I told her no. When she asked me why, I said that quite frankly, I simply despise my brother-in-law. I hate him for how he made fun of us doctors while the virus was widespread, how he called me stupid for recommending vaccines to my baby cousin's parents, how he told the family he's pretty sure I cheated in medical school. She had the audacity to tell me that was just a joke, but I told her that jokes like that can cost me my career, and I wouldn't be doing it. After I got off the phone, my wife Jessica begged me to be the bigger person and to help out her brother, but I once again said no. I wasn't going to help someone who made my life a living hell. When I told her this, she tried to convince me more, saying that family came first and pleading to find it in my heart to help him. Her brother Mike had a way of getting into my wife's ear and getting whatever he wanted out of Jessica, since he was her younger brother. A few years ago, around the time, Jessica and I were planning our wedding. We had everything carefully planned and budgeted, but Mike had other ideas. He wanted us to hire his friend's band for the reception. Their band was way out of our budget, and frankly, not to our taste. He tried to convince Jessica, saying that their band was amazing and would make our night unforgettable, but Jessica told him that we already had a DJ booked and that we were tight on our budget. Mike continued reminding her of the time that he helped her with the down payment for her first car and the time she was short on rent in college. He then said that she knew that Mom would love it and that she always said she wanted Mike more involved with planning the wedding. Think about how happy it would make her, he said to Jessica. The final blow was when he said that I could afford the band with me being a successful doctor after all. What's a little extra expense to him? He asked Jessica. She eventually broke down and added them to the wedding. He had successfully convinced her it was a good idea, and as we went home together that night, she kept talking about how good it would be for the band to perform at the wedding. I couldn't tell if she was trying to convince me or herself. I told her that we already had a plan and that we couldn't keep changing things just because Mike wanted us to, and that's when she pulled the family card on me. She asked if I could just do it one time for the family, and I reluctantly
reluctantly agreed. The band ended up being mediocre at best, but Mike got what he wanted, as always. And fast forward to now, I'm getting the same puppy eyes and family plea that I got years ago. I reminded her of all the times that Mike belittled my profession and me, but it seemed like water under the bridge for Jessica. 2 years ago, when I was up for a partnership at a prestigious clinic, it was a golden opportunity. The family had gathered at my mother-in-law Linda's house for dinner. I was excited to share the news with everyone, and hopeful that even Mike would see this as a big achievement. As I explained the opportunity and how close I was to securing the partnership, I noticed Mike smirking. He said it was a step up, and asked me if I was worried that someone else could get the position. I said of course I was, but from the way the founder was speaking, it seemed like he was interested in me. Jessica told Mike to think more positively, and he said to her that I shouldn't have anything to worry about, as long as I didn't have any skeletons in my closet. I didn't know what he was talking about at the time, but I continued our conversation. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I decided to ignore Mike's comments. I figured he was just trying to get under my skin, as usual. A few weeks later, just as I was preparing for the final review with the clinic's board, I received an anonymous email. It contained screenshots of forum posts and emails, all suggesting that I had been involved in malpractice. The accusations were baseless, but they were damaging enough to cast doubt. I was blindsided. I had no idea where these rumors had come from, but they were spreading like wildfire. My colleagues started treating me differently, and the board began to hesitate about my partnership. I needed to clear my name. I hired a private investigator. What they found was shocking, but, in hindsight, unsurprising. The anonymous posts and emails had all been traced back to a burner account linked to Mike. I was enraged. I went to Mike's house immediately to confront him. I told him that I knew he tried to sabotage my career and asked him what I did to deserve that. He told me that I always thought I was so perfect and tried to brag about my fancy doctor job. He said he was leveling the playing field. When Jessica found out, she was horrified. She went off on Mike and stopped speaking to him after that, but Mike eventually found his way back in. He always did. And even though I had evidence to prove my innocence, the damage was done. The clinic decided not to move forward with my partnership because they needed to protect their reputation. My career took a significant hit, but I was able to bounce back over the past few years. After I refused to do Mike's surgery, Linda and Mike wanted revenge. They began harassing me relentlessly. They call me at all hours, disrupting my sleep and work. They'd show up at the hospital, causing scenes and embarrassing me in front of my colleagues. One morning, I was in the middle of my rounds when I saw Mike in my waiting room near the reception desk. My heart sank. I had a bad feeling about this. As I approached the nurse's station, I overheard him talking to one of my patients. He started speaking loudly, saying that I refused to perform surgery on him because I didn't want to be responsible if something went wrong, and saying that I couldn't handle it. He said I was too scared to operate on him. The rest of the patients looked at me for my response. I tried to reassure them that it would be fine and not to worry about what Mike was saying. Then Mike got louder, saying that he wasn't done, and started discrediting my practice, and that I was a fraud. The other patients and staff were staring and began whispering. It felt like when I got rejected from the clinic all over again. I told Mike to leave, and went to the back to check on my patient, and when I returned, Mike was at it again, this time talking to the hospital administrator. He was going on about if his own brother-in-law didn't want to help him out, then why should the other patients trust him? He painted himself as a person who was genuinely concerned about the other patient's well-being, all the while trying to ruin my reputation again. I threatened to call the cops on him if he didn't leave, and he agreed, not without saying his last hurtful remarks. The next morning, I checked the hospital's Google reviews out of habit. My heart sank as I saw a slew of new negative reviews, all posted within the last 24 hours. They were filled with baseless accusations, painting me as an incompetent and uncaring doctor who refused to treat patients for personal reasons. One read, he refused to help his own family member in need. If he can do that to his own family, imagine what he'll do to strangers. Another read, beware, he prioritizes his personal grudges over patient care. The reviews were all anonymous, but I had no doubt they were made by Mike. Later that day, as I was walking out of the hospital, I saw Mike waiting near my car. I had enough. I told him that this had to stop now. He had crossed every line imaginable. He tried to paint me as the bad guy, saying that none of this would have happened if I had just performed the surgery on him. He said I brought it upon myself. I realized then that trying to reason with Mike was pointless. I got in my car and drove off. That night, Mike started posting on social media about me and the practice. He made posts about me being a bad person and an unfit doctor who cut corners. They even went as far as to say that I was purposefully neglecting a family member in need. Over the next few weeks, patients began to question my abilities, and my colleagues grew anxious. The smear campaign was taking a toll not only on my career, but also on my mental health, especially after I finally got my name cleared up from the accusations just years ago. One evening, after a hard day at the hospital, I sat Jessica down in our living room. I told her that I couldn't do the harassment anymore, and that they were destroying my reputation. For my peace of mind, I had to remove her mom and brother from my life. Her face was pale as she asked me to explain. I told her that I couldn't go to family functions acting happy with them while they were in the streets slandering my name and almost costing me my career twice. Her mom and brother still had Jessica Jessica wrapped around their finger. She said that she couldn't choose between me and her family, and that it wasn't fair that she had to make that decision. I told her that I'd give her a couple of days to make her decision. She said she didn't need that. She told me she loved me, and that she understood how much it hurt me to face them. She ultimately chose me. However, the decision didn't stop Linda and Mike. They turned their harassment towards Jessica. They accused her of being disloyal and cold-hearted. They called her repeatedly, sent hateful messages, and even showed up at her workplace, causing scenes and disrupting her life. Then, out of nowhere, an anonymous email landed in my inbox. It contained screenshots of conversations between Mike and another family member, revealing a plan to ruin my career if I didn't agree to the surgery. I was shocked, but not surprised. It was the final nail in the coffin. I showed Jessica the email. She couldn't believe that they would go that far, but I knew firsthand how vicious Mike was. This didn't surprise me, but I knew I had to put an end to it. Jessica decided to confront her family. She arranged a meeting with Linda and Mike and brought the screenshots with her. They thought that she was meeting with them to give them the news that I agreed to do the surgery, but they quickly realized what the meeting was about when I joined her and laid the papers on the table. The confrontation was heated. Mike denied everything at first, but when faced with the proof, he became defensive. Jessica asked Mike why he would do such a thing when I did nothing to him, and he said that I was never good enough for Jessica and that I was weak. I guess this was his plan to show her that. She always placed Mike as the #1 guy in her life for years, since he was her little brother, and now he just seemed jealous because he didn't have her attention anymore. After Mike's doings were affecting her personal life, she realized how destructive they really were and how her mom was an enabler this entire time. She decided to cut them off as well, blocking their numbers and social media accounts. Jessica and I were left to deal with the emotional fallout. We had hoped that cutting ties would bring peace, but instead, it left a void that was hard to fill. Jessica struggled with guilt and sadness after losing her relationship with her family, while I tried to put together the broken pieces of my professional reputation and deal with stress from the ordeal. In the weeks that followed, Jessica and I focused on rebuilding our lives. I sought therapy to help cope with the stress and trauma of the past months, while Jessica leaned on a support group. My colleagues eventually started to see me for what I really was, and not the Mike narrative that was going around. They offered support and encouragement. Through time, I restored my confidence. Gradually, the rumors and accusations began to fade, and my reputation as a skilled and compassionate surgeon was reinstated. Jessica, too, found new strength. She immersed herself in her work and hobbies, finding new friends who supported her unconditionally. A few months later, I received a surprising letter from Linda. She apologized for everything, admitting she was wrong to side with Mike without understanding the full situation. She asked for a chance to mend the relationship. I showed the letter to Jessica and asked what she thought about it. Jessica read it and began crying. She said that we could give her mom another chance, but she said she wasn't ready for Mike. I agreed and told her that we could take one step at a time to protect our peace. We decided to meet Linda at a local coffee shop and set clear boundaries from the start. I was unsure the reunion would go smoothly, but I was hopeful. Mike, on the other hand, showed no remorse. He continued his life without me and Jessica. Years later, Jessica and I have built a happy life together. We've learned to cherish our relationship and the family we've chosen to build around us. One evening, as we sat by the fireplace, Jessica looked at me and smiled. We'd been through so much, but I wouldn't change a thing. It brought us here together, and we were stronger than ever. I took her hand, and at that moment, we knew that we'd made the right choices.